Hi, everyone. Hello. Hi. I'm glad to see you're all still alive. I hear there's been a lot of events. Yeah, I'm here from Anthropic, as it says on the slide. I'm Emmanuel. It's nice meeting you all. The goal of this talk is just really to share some of the prompt engineering tips that I've learned, that Anthropic has learned. This will be really interactive, so if you're interested, I encourage you to pay attention, because most of it, I'm just going to ask you what you would do, and then tell you what I would do, and then we can discuss kind of what works and what doesn't. As a show of hand, who is familiar with large language models? Okay, most, but not all. Who is familiar with the term prompting? Okay, the same people. That makes sense. Cool. So we'll go over some of the basics, and feel free to just interrupt me for questions. This is a very long presentation by design. It's okay if we don't get through all of it. It kind of ramps up in complexity. Cool. So quickly, I'll tell you about Anthropic, its model, its capabilities, just for context. We'll go over really quickly. Then useful context about what prompting is, prompting basics, and then we'll move on to intermediate, advanced. If you make it there, there's an expert quiz that we can go for. And yeah, cool. So if you don't know Anthropic, Anthropic is a AI safety company. We have our own large language model called Claude. We have kind of the mental model, I would say, is that you can map Claude to GPT-4 and Claude Instant to GPT 3.5 if you're with that. They're two models. One is faster and one is more competent. Claude's really fast, so if you want to give it a try, hit me up. It's about 2 to 4 times faster than GPT, depending on how you compare it. It's also pretty cost effective. Part of the reason is that we charge less for prompts than for the output, because that is cheaper. And so depending on your use case, that can make a huge difference. And if you're not aware of large language models, they have this thing called context, where you can put, that's the amount of information you can put in a model. And we released 100K context. 100K tokens is about the length of the first Harry Potter book. So you can pass that to Claude, and it'll just summarize it for you if you'd like. Cool. So moving on to the actual meat of this talk. So useful context about prompting. And yeah, again, raise your hand if you're confused. Prompting is an empirical science. LLMs are new. Nobody really knows how this works, and there's no good theoretical framework yet. So really, it's a matter of you try to get an LLM to do a thing, it doesn't work. You try to ask it differently, it works. You don't know why, usually, unfortunately. It requires iteration. For anything that matters, it's worth spending a half hour to an hour trying to prompt a model differently. For every model that I've tried, whether Anthropic's models or other models, prompting can make a huge difference. It can be the difference between the model just not doing the task at all and doing it 100% correctly 100% of the time. So it requires iteration. And LLMs are a bit weird because they feel like people in the way that they respond to you. You could almost fool yourself into believing you're talking to a random person. But then they're brilliant in some ways and completely idiotic in others. And so the way that I try to think about it is I'm talking to this alien that's read all about what humans are and is reasonably intelligent, but will make fundamental mistakes, maybe it won't remember what an egg is or something. So that's I think a good mental model for it. Types of tasks that work well. I'm curious actually really quickly for people that have used LLMs, what they've used it for. Let me shout it out. Programming. What was that? Customer support. Search. Yeah. Summarization. Okay. Bedtime stories? That's cool. Okay. Yeah, there's a wide variety. When I was coming up with that slide, I was there's too much stuff to put on it. I tried to categorize it. I think there's really simple stuff, classification, you give it some text and it's is this about this support category or that support category? Text summarization and question answering, ingestion of books, papers, contracts, transcripts, and having the model reason about them. Text generation, bedtime stories or other. Could be translation. I write all my emails with language models. Document drafting or document editing, they're super useful. Dialogue agents, so kind of building your own chat agents. Code-related tasks, yep. Models have found bugs that I wrote, so that's cool. And yeah, combination of the above. So a bunch of stuff, we'll cover some of it. This is maybe a crucial slide, so again, let me know if you're confused. The way that Anthropic in particular does its prompt format is outlined here. This is not true for all language models, but usually there's a one-to-one mapping with one thing they do. So for Anthropic, the way that like the model receives an instruction is it receives like human, colon, blah, blah, assistant, colon, blah, blah. And so like to the model, usually it receives like a series of those and then assistant, colon, and then it completes that. Which means that if in the prompt there's a bunch of like human assistant words to the model that looks exactly the same as if you had been talking to it for a while, because it looks like you're just like chatting back and forth. And so that's the format of the prompt, and that's both kind of like simple, but also kind of nice because you can fool the model into thinking it said things that it didn't, for example. So we can talk about that. Is that clear? Any questions about that? I see nods. Okay. Cool. So instructions basics. For people that have used LLMs, like if somebody was asking you like, how do I use this? Like, how do I get it to do the thing I do? Like, what are just general guidelines? Yeah, instruction, correct. Examples, yeah, yeah. Yeah, what do you mean? Set boundaries and constraints? Yeah? Yeah? Yeah, like framing the task. Again, like things that like a human might reasonably infer, but like a model definitely won't. One of my favorite ones is sometimes you can tell a model like, oh, give me the correct answer, and it'll give you the correct answer, but if you don't, it'll give you garbage. Okay, cool, so yeah, describe the task, explain it as you would to like somebody without context. Your job is to reply to customer questions, give example inputs and outputs, provide more context, as you were mentioning. Demand specific output formatting that can be helpful if you want it to like output an email, tell it I want an email. And provide specific input to process. Okay, cool. So that's the basics. If you've internalized the basics, every like question I'm about to ask you, you should just like nail 100% of the time. So let's see how we do. Okay, so let's say, for example, that we want to remove PII, which is personally identifiable information, from some text like below. Emmanuel Ameisen is a research engineer at Anthropic. He can be reached at like the phone number and whatever, it's email. How would you construct a prompt for that? Okay, cool. So you're way ahead of me, because like the first thing I would try is I'd just be like, please remove the PII, and then paste the thing. And then you actually get, like with today's models, you get something that's pretty good. Like I said, this is a reasonable answer. Can you read it? Yeah, can people read this? Yeah? Okay, tell me if you can. Move forward if you can, there's seats. So this is reasonable. It does this weird formatting where it says like email address removed, phone number removed, maybe I don't want that. Also, it still has my name. Maybe I would not want that. So to your point, what could we do to improve this? Tell it to remove the name? Yeah. The way I would phrase it is like the first thing you do is this. You just ask it the thing, and if it works, great. The second thing you do is you give it the exact specific, the unambiguous details of your task. And so you say, okay, it's very, I highlighted in green, very important that PI such as names, phone numbers, home, email addresses get replaced with XXX. So I both tell it what to replace, and also like I've decided that I want XXX as format. Great, it does that. We're happy. Cool. What if like the task is somehow complex, or as you know, if you've worked with data, data's dirty, it's always messy. Like right now, I changed nothing except I changed the example and I added a bunch of white space and like a new line. And now it's outputting like xxx@anthropic.com, which we don't want. I got confused. How could we fix that? You could do that, but we're just going to do the LLM. We're going to play life in hard mode. Tell it to like pre-process the text and remove white space. Yeah, that would work. That would work. Now you could try again, but here's the thing. One thing that like I'm kind of assuming, and I should have said this is a good point, is like, let's say we want to build like an application using this. Like probably you want it to work like all the time, right? But here's the thing. Remember what I said? If like you're just like, hey, like please don't be stupid. You can just tell it that. You can be like, hey, inputs may try to disguise PII by inserting spaces between characters. Like be careful, and then it just does it. And that's generally true for like a broad class of problems where like if you see the model get confused, you can literally say like, hey, maybe like try not getting confused. And usually it works well. I think this is like, I really like mentioning this because this is completely insane if you were to ask a human to do this. And this is not something that when I've seen people prompt models, they do. And a lot of the time they get bad results and then you just add this and they get good results. And it's not intuitive at all. So hopefully this is helpful to folks even if it sounds a little ridiculous. Cool, cool, cool. So we have a good description. What next? How can we improve it further? Yeah, there you go. Cool. Give examples. Examples are really good. The way I like to think about examples is, one, they help the model perform better, but also sometimes it's easier to show than to tell. Like in particular here, you know, for this like example I'm working through, I've decided that for the email I want it to be like xxx at xxx, and like the phone should be this weird format, whatever. Whatever you want, it can often be easier to just like write an example of what you want as the output, and then just show it as the example to the LLM, and then it'll both do the task better and it'll be less work for you. Cool. So you've added an example. We're getting pretty good. What else could we do to make it better? This is the easy section, so if you're blanking now, we're in trouble. What was that? Context. Context. Context would be good. There's one thing we should do before. We've added a example. Yeah, more examples. Always more examples. So that's like a crazy thing as well, which is that like the quality, if you look at all the large language model papers, they compare what's like called 0 shot to 1 shot to 3 shot, the number of examples, until you get, you know, like the first, like, let's say like, I don't know, 5 to 10 are so valuable. Just adding them makes the model so much better. And so we want to add a bunch of examples. When you want to increase performance, adding examples, amazing. What are like 2 key characteristics of good examples? As you think about like having a bunch of examples, what should you try to keep in mind? This is a hard one. Yeah? Yes, they should be diverse. Like try to cover, you know, kind of like a wide spectrum of different things. Edge cases. Edge cases is pretty good. The other thing I was going to say, I think I should add edge cases, honestly, but maybe that's part of diverse. They should be relevant. A lot of the time, you have examples that are like slightly not relevant, and you don't necessarily realize it, so try to make them as close to the actual task as possible. The diversity one is like really important, in particular, to avoid like LLMs are really bad at like doing what they think you want, but not what you want. So if you were to like, let's say, do a task where you're giving it a bunch of like question and answers in multiple choice format, like ABCD, and all of your examples, you pick A, the model will just be like, got it. Like whatever you give me, I'll pick answer A. And so there's like a lot of more nuanced way that you can have exactly that pattern. So trying to kind of think about like very different types of examples so that your model doesn't just like overfit to the like format rather than the actual content that you want it to learn. Any questions about that? Yeah? Yeah, okay, so the question was like, is it better, I'm gonna rephrase that to like, provide me like, yeah, controversial examples, like examples on the boundary of like what is, you know, one versus the other, or like pretty clear cut. I think that's empirical. I found both to work, either to work in different cases. And I think a lot of these, most of these tips are very generalizable, but like more specific tips like, oh, always use like nuanced examples or always use clear cut, I haven't found a clear pattern. That's a good question though. Cool. Generating examples is hard. You know, can models like Claude help? Yes. Like one thing that is annoying about writing prompts is it takes creativity, and creative writing is hard. And so you can use, and you should use these models both for like generating examples, being like, here's one example of like removing PII, generate 15 more. And also generate like ones that are like very different or very similar. And then asking the model if like, here, I have 15 examples, are they like sufficiently relevant and diverse? It does an amazing job at that, and so I would recommend doing that. A quick note, which is as you do this, I've seen people like do a bunch of prompting, and then they kind of like end up just like squinting at the results, and you're like, I think like this is slightly better, this is slightly worse. This is something where we're still doing machine learning, so it's good to have a test set, and it's valuable to like generate a bunch of examples that you know the answer to, and then try all of your prompts on these examples, and then measure like how well your model is doing on those examples, ideally automatically. So you know you have your prompt that you're constructing, and then you have like a data set that you never use in your prompt. You test a model on that, and you see if the model's improving. Does that make sense? Nods, nods, nods. Cool. Okay, good. Intermediate level. Ooh, maybe we'll get through this level before questions. All right, let's see. So this is a long prompt. You don't need to read it because it's the prompt we were using. But one thing that happens with models, all of them, is they get a little chatty because they've been trained for dialogue. This is kind of like not great if you want to use, let's say, these results again in an application, where like if I'm like, hey, model, like remove the PII, and it's like, sure thing, buddy, here it is. It's like, I don't want the sure thing, buddy. I just want you to give me the answer. So like, is there a way that we could just get it to like give us only the answer, and then I can just like literally take the return and throw it in my application? What's that? Reduce the number of tokens? Maybe, but because it's training, it's likely to still use its first few tokens to give you garbage. Tell it to be concise. Yeah? Specify the output format you want? Yeah, hell yeah, that works super well. It works, I think my understanding is like with GPT, JSON works better, but with Claude, you can do both JSON and XML. So XML is just like these like HTML-like tags. Here I highlighted in green, I just told the model, hey, please put the de-identified version in response tags, and then it just responds with like response, blah, response. And so what's kind of cool about these kind of tags is that sometimes the model just really wants to chat with you, and it'll still say like, sure thing, buddy, but then it'll be like, response, blah, response, and that's super easy to just extract that, right? Like in the string, you just take a regular expression and you get the thing that's in between the response tags. Cool. Okay, this is like, I think maybe the first prompt engineering technique I've heard of. How can you improve the prompt below? And I'm gonna give you a hint. It's like, how can you help the model think better? This is like a, some like riddle. I mean, it's not even a riddle for a human, it's like trivial, but some logical thing. How can you help improve the model performance? Show its work? Yeah. I think another version of that people have talked about is like think step by step. I think it's like maybe the first prompting strategy I've heard of, and also seems completely ludicrous, where like, you tell the model, like, give me the answer, it gives you the wrong answer. You're like, think about it. It's like, oh, sure, I'll think about it, and it gives you the correct answer. Yeah, this works. It like basically encourages the model to like think step by step, and then give you the answer. One important nuance that I've seen people get tripped up on is you absolutely need the model to think step by step first. If the model outputs, the answer is 3, and here's my step-by-step reasoning after, you've already lost. Because the whole point of step-by-step is that as it's outputting its like reasoning steps, it is increasing the likelihood that the answer it eventually gives you at the end is good. But if it gives you the answer first, it's just gonna make up a reasoning that gets to that answer. Now, a little nuance too is that modern models don't need this as much as they used to. A lot of them seem to like kind of just essentially exhibit this behavior as a result of like better training and maybe like seeing stuff like that in their training data. And so models now often will think step by step by themselves. It doesn't hurt to add it, so I would say still add it if you want. Like I don't see a downside, but it might not be necessary. Cool. Okay, can you combine both? So we talked about like using XML to like have output formatting, and then thinking step by step. How could we combine both? Does it make sense? How would we do it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could tell it to put thinking tags and then response tags. You should just give the talk instead of me. Exactly, correct. That works super well. And I find also is kind of, yeah, you get the best of both worlds, right? Because again, usually you don't care about the thinking, like in terms of like what you want is the correct answer. So putting it in tags just lets you, it does its thinking, you can verify as you're testing that the thinking is reasonable, and then just extract the answer for whatever you want. Cool. Oh yeah, and I should say, sorry, I didn't even, this example is like, I give it the entire Anthropic FAQ, and I ask it a question, and then it does some thinking, and it gets the answer. Okay. What if we want the model to like do a multiple choice classification? So this is a pretty good prompt, I would say. Again, like you're some customer service agent, here's an email, which category is it in? But I think we can make it better. What could we do? This is an advanced technique. So none of the things we've mentioned so far, something else. Curate a lot of examples and then like fine-tune the prompt on these examples? Yeah, I mean, I think that would work. This is simpler. But this is a good, like, one step before we bring out the hammer. Yeah? More context? I'm going to put that in the category of things we've already talked about, but yes, I think there's a lot of stuff that we could, yes. but not that. Did you have a? Describe what each category is. That would also be helpful. All these are good. All these are good. Are they what I wanted? No. Can I blame you for it? No, because it's like there's 10 things you could try, and it's one on the next slide. So there's another technique I want to talk about, which is I had mentioned you can put words in Claude's mouth. This works especially well in the API. You can say, this is a different interface, but the exact same prompt, and then highlighted in green, you can say, assistant, my answer is parentheses. And that prompts the model essentially to immediately complete with what its answer is. This is, the way I think about it is this is the opposite of like think by step. This is in cases where, for example, I only want to, somebody talked about limiting tokens to sample. I only want to sample one token, and I want that token to give me the answer to my question. This is like very useful. You just like literally put the start of the sentence that you want in Claude's mouth, you know, or I think you can do something similar with ChatGPT, and you do my answer is like parentheses, blah, and it just works. Cool. No questions? One question. Yes. Yeah. Or I mean, it wouldn't be training, it would be like prompting. But yeah, exactly. You can, so the question was like, can you do this? Can you use this to kind of give examples? Yeah, you can totally do the thing where you're like, oh, hey, Claude, I have like a hard question for you. Like, how would you do this? And then you write assistant the correct answer. And then, you know, you like keep doing turns of dialogue where you like make Claude think it's just like really good at this thing. And that works. In my experience, it doesn't necessarily work much better than just putting the examples in the prompt. So, you know, but it's worth trying, certainly, if you're having trouble. Cool. Oh my God, we made it to advanced level. All right, this is crazy. Okay, what is the risk with like some hard random trivia like this? Like what's kind of like, yeah, failure mode here, yeah? It's gonna make it up, yeah. So I love language models. I do improv, been doing it for years. I think language models are the best improvisers on earth. Nobody ever could come up with like 6 paragraphs of complete nonsense about the heaviest hippo ever recorded. None of this is true, but here's the thing, by the way. A lot of this is true enough, which is worrying. It's like, it is true that the heaviest hippo ever recorded was from Germany. Some other facts in this are true according to like the very scientific research I did after getting this prompt. But you know, all this is nonsense. Okay, so that's not great. Ideally, we would like models to be honest. How do we fix that? Cite sources, okay. But if you cite sources, there's actually like, if you cite sources without it having access to the internet, for example, it's just gonna make up the sources. So cite sources works if you've given it, for example, a document in its context through a search engine or something. But that works, but no search engine. How? Yeah, obviously. Just be like, hey, like, maybe just don't make stuff up. Again, this is like, I put this in the category of like, how is it that this is 2023? But yeah, if you just tell them all like, hey, maybe like don't be a liar, it'll be, oh, okay, like if I don't know, I'll just say I don't know, and that just works. By the way, when I say that just works, we haven't solved honesty. That helps. Yeah, a lot of these like techniques will help. They won't all work fully, but that helps significantly. Okay, what about like if you're trying to do like a complex task? So in this, I'm trying to write an essay, you know, arguing whether AI safety is the largest challenge of the 21st century. You know, I give it this thing, I'm like, oh, I want 3 topic sentences for, 3 against, and then I want a conclusion. And then, you know, Claude, you don't need to read this whole thing, but it gives me something that kind of looks like an essay, but in the middle, there's these 3 bullet points. That's not what I asked for. So like, how do I make it better? How do I get it to do like kind of like a complex multi-step task? Come on, you got this. Like just write the first paragraph and then, yeah, you could break it down that way. How would you, oh, sorry, was somebody? You could insert something like recursively check for the accuracy or. Yeah, recursively check that you're doing the right thing. That works. That's even a little more complex than what I had in mind. How would you do this as like a human? So if like I'm teaching you, this is the first essay you ever write, like what would I tell you to do first? Yeah, write an outline, right? Like one good mental model for LLMs is that like, if you don't give it a chance to like think, It's literally just like the first token is like the first sentence of the essay, and then it has committed to this forever, which is like a very hard way to write an essay, right? And so one way you can do this is like break down the steps. Here I'm like, write 3 sentences for, and put them in, I use the XML tags, which again is super helpful. Write 3 sentences against in those tags, and then write an essay by expanding on these steps. And that's what it does. It writes, I highlighted like the for, and then it writes like a bunch of arguments for, arguments against, and then the essay, you know, I encourage you to read it on your own time, but I read it and I thought it was like pretty good. At least much, much better than the prior one, and like synthesizes the arguments. Cool. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so just to repeat it for everyone, that's a super good advice. It's like if you're gonna write something, tell it what the audience is, or conversely, you could tell it like, write it in the style of, you know, like what was it? Somebody was like experimenting with like in the style of Bill Nye, in the style of others, and like you can see that it's much better at explaining if you ask in the style of like, you know, somebody that's knowledgeable and a good educator. And yeah, I think it writes in the style of middle schooler, and also like when people complain like, oh, these models all sound the same, it's because they're not doing that. But if you try to actually ask it in a different style, they're excellent. Especially I think Claude personally is, I'm biased, but I think Claude is really good at that. Cool. This sort of stuff also like works really well if you're doing very long document summarization, where, you know, here I put like the Anthropic FAQ at the top, which is like pretty long, and I say, please extract word for word any quotes relevant to this question. And the question are like, what are all the means of customizing Claude? And then like asking it, like here, I should say, probably what I want to do is not just get quotes. Probably what I want to do is I want to answer the question of like, what are all the means of customizing Claude? But you can break down the task even further. Instead of doing like 1, 2, 3 in your prompt, you just ask it to do the first thing, kind of like the first paragraph you were talking about. And so here, you know, you do this, and then it gives you like these quotes, which are like correct. I'm like, oh, good, you've given me the quotes. And so now that we have the quotes, what we can simply do is prompt chaining. So, sorry, I think this slide is incorrect, but I'll just skip. We can prompt chain. And we can take the results of the first model call, the quotes, and put them in the middle of a second question to the model, right? If you're just talking with the model, you could just like do a new message being like, oh, here are the quotes, and I'll give you the thing. But here, if you're doing like something programmatic, you take the first model call, you make a new prompt with like, here's the document. Also, here are direct quotes that are relevant. Based on these quotes that are relevant, please answer the question, what are all the means of customizing Claude? And boom, it does a good job. I realize I didn't show you like what it does if you don't do that. It does a worse job. You'll have to take my word for it. Cool. Now, you're all fans of Anthropic and Claude, so you all know that this actually is incorrect. There's a third way to customize Claude, and the model missed it. So what do you do in that case? What do you do if there's a missing quote? Let's say I'm like experimenting, I got these quotes, I'm like, you're missing something. Somebody said this in reply to an earlier question. What's that? Ah, yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So I think that's the spirit of the answer. The answer was like, oh, you just tell it missed something. More precisely, if you want to build it, again, as part of like a programmatic pipeline, you could be like, okay, extract the quotes. And then you can be like, here are some quotes. Here's a document. Here are all of the quotes, or here's a list of quotes that are relevant to this question. Please add any incremental quotes that are missing from this list. And it turns out that models are often their ability to discriminate that an error or that an answer is incorrect is superior to their ability to generate the correct answer. Meaning, they're better at at like detecting that they themselves made a mistake in the past and then correcting it than they are at getting it right on the first try. And so this is kind of like exploiting that behavior. And so if you do that, it'll be like, ah, yes, there is an additional Claude. An additional quote, sorry. In the vast majority, you don't need this, but you know, you can also fine-tune the model. So it gives you the additional quote. Okay, I think this is maybe the last one or the second to last one, so this is kind of cool. I didn't think we could run through the whole thing. Okay, so does the model even get it? Here, I ask, how many times does Apple appear in the sentence? The answer is 4. The model then tells me like, hey, let's break this down step by step. It doesn't break it down step by step at all. And it gets the wrong answer. So is this impossible? Maybe like Claude can't do it. Maybe it just like doesn't even understand what words are. You know, like large language models use tokenizers. They break down models in small parts. Maybe that's just not a thing it could do. Is there a way that we could try to like say like, hey, if I prompt it better, will it be able to do it? Or is it just not, that's just beyond, you know, today's frontier? And here I'd encourage you to think about like, if I was asking like a 6-year-old something, or maybe like a 10-year-old, how could I check whether, you know, there's a good chance they'd be able to do it? Maybe this was not a helpful hint at all. How you got to 6. So you don't want to ask that because it already got to the answer, and then it's just going to complete something that's a reasonable reasoning. So post hoc never works. You always want to do pre-cognition, but I'm thinking of something different. Sorry, go ahead. You could just give it an example and say, hey, is this correct? Yeah, okay. You could, I like this line, we're getting closer. You could give it examples and be like, is this example correct? Is that one correct? To see if it can tell you if it's correct. Yeah, okay. You go word by word and you're like, is this word apple? Is that word apple? That would work. That would work. But you can do something even dumber. You can just ask the model, hey, do you understand what I'm telling you? That's what you would ask a 10-year-old. You'd be like, hey, like, here's a task. Like, do you understand what I'm asking you? And then you could see, like, does Claude kind of like give you a reasonable explanation in its own words of what you're asking it to do? Or is it complete nonsense? In this case, if it doesn't, it's a good time to like iterate on the prompt, do kind of like the other things that you guys were talking about. But if it does, here, like, it's like actually like very reasonable. It's like, here's my understanding of the instructions. You know, you'll give me a sentence, like I'll whatever count the time number of times apple appears. By the way, to make this example work, I had to like give a specifically bad example. Like I think I give it the example like, oh, for example, in apple the word appears once or whatever. But anyways, with that it still understands it. And so then what you can do is, if it does understand it, you can put its reframing in the prompt. And basically you're asking Claude like, hey, if you understand it, tell it to me in your own way. And then you're putting that in the prompt, that instruction that Claude itself has told you. And then that works. This is definitely one of the more like speculative kind of weird ones, but I found that it works quite often. And so one, it works to like decipher whether something is working or not. And two, it works to then improve your prompt. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yeah.
I've kind of lost status with having to give its own instructions, right? Like, this is what I want to do. Well, give me a prompt that does that.
Exactly.
And it's much better.
Yeah. So yeah, what you're saying is like you can just tell Claude like, hey, I kind of want to do this. Give me like a good prompt for me to give you later to do this thing. And this is essentially like a variation of that. Yeah, and that works well. And there's this kind of weird thing where it's like maybe like it's speaking large language model English in its version of it, and it understands that better. But yeah. Cool. Okay, so we're running low on time, so I want to make sure we get some questions. So I'm going to give you one expert level quiz, which I think is kind of interesting, and then we'll do questions. So expert level quiz. I have a very, very long document, whatever, The Great Gatsby, and I want Claude to answer a question about it. Do I put the question before the document? That's like question and then the whole document. Do I put the question after? Do I do both? Or it doesn't matter? Or something else, I don't know. Okay, we're going to do this by show of hands. Question before. Interesting. Question after. Interesting. Both? Doesn't matter? Okay. Wow, you're geniuses. Yeah. Question after works better. I personally find this extremely counterintuitive. We ran like an internal experiment on like a variety of tasks, and I kind of like tested both, and we found that it was like pretty significant. So if you have like a long document and you're like, hey, like in this document, you know, like, I don't know, who's the bad guy? The model somehow does way better if it reads the whole document without any idea of what you're going to ask it, and then is asked a question, than if you do the opposite. And I think that I like this example because it's also an example of how models are fundamentally different in terms of like how their cognition, if you want to use that term, works from ours. Cool. I'm going to skip over about 1 trillion slides that just have a bunch of examples. And yeah, thank you for your time. That's it.